Hello interwebs, welcome to Let's Cherry Pick Easy Looking Repairs Off the Shelf to make a YouTube video about. Let's fix computers. I've got a Dell Precision 7710 here, so it's a big boy laptop, this one. The Dell Precisions are the workstation class Dell laptops. So this guy is stone dead, if my memory serves me, and I've forgotten to get the charger for it. So one moment, I'm going to go and get that charger. Takes this massive 240 watt boy, this. It probably has an NVIDIA Quadro in it, this thing, or something similar like that. These are designed for CAD work, but like on the move. So it's very similar to a gaming laptop in it to an extent. But that also means that these can turn into nightmares. So, right, we've got a light on the charger, and what happens with this one is when I plug the charger in to the top left here, boop, light on the charger goes out immediately. And that will stay off now until the charger is reset. So I'll unplug the charger, wait a couple of seconds, then plug it back in, and now the light on the charger is back. So the charger cuts out when we plug it in. This usually means that there is a short in the laptop, and just the charger's built-in cutout is kicking in. So let's roll the intro while I take some screws off the back of this thing and take a look inside. Oh, it's going to be one of the horrible ones. So this laptop is following what I call a three-piece design. Where you have to take some screws off to take off the bottom panels, and that gives you great access to a lot of common things that you'd want to get to. Memory, SSDs, more SSDs, add-in cards, and so on. But it also means that if you actually want to get to the motherboard, you have to dig a lot deeper. So we're going to have a whole bunch more screws that now need to come out. So yeah, I got a love-hate relationship with this kind of design. It's nice that there is like user access to this stuff, but you could provide this level of access without covering up the motherboard and making actual repair work a lot harder. Doesn't matter. Right, I'm going to go fast while I take all of this out because I've now got to take out all of this stuff to actually get anywhere useful. Right, taking out all the screws, let's now just do a little bit of prying and just see if anything wants to move. God, this thing feels like a tank. I'm not actually sure how to get into this. I might need to look up a reference. We got anything from the keyboard? Let's see if that gets me anywhere. Yeah, the keyboard is removable. Pain. So we need to make sure we disconnect these wires under here because they're going to come out attached to the keyboard, I believe. Right, that front bit should want to move now. There we go. Okay. What I hate about stuff like this is just that it takes so long just to assemble and disassemble just to take a look. Like, if we get down as far as the motherboard and we find that there's a shorted VRM into the CPU, which is probably going to be enough for me to be like, haha, no, I'm not touching this. I've got to put all of this back in. It's such a lot of work just to do just the most basic viability check. Okay, what wants to come off now? I'm going to try for the bottom again. No. What about the top? Okay. Palm rest is coming off. Alright, okay, we're getting somewhere. Wow, another 2 RAM slots, huh? Removable graphics card. A rare sight in these days. All the I/O is on separate boards as well. As much as this thing is a pain in the ass to be disassembled, it is built to be repairable, which is kind of interesting. Repairable is a loose term, of course. It's just, what does repairable mean? Does it mean that it's easy to disassemble, or does it mean that just simply it has been built with the expectation that bits of it will break and need to be replaced? It's a very modular laptop is what I'm gunning at here. So the DC jack goes here and plugs into the board here. So I want access to that section of the motherboard to start out with. So there might be stuff to see under this I/O board. I might do a little bit of stabbing though and see what I can find. Put the multimeter into resistance mode, and so I'm looking for the main power rail in the laptop, and we've got the GPU here and the CPU here, and there's some big capacitors around here. So one of those is bound to be our main power rail. So if I do a little bit of blind stabbing, we can probably get a rough idea on where we're looking at. So I'll put my black probe on one of these screw holes, and let's just start out with these tantalum caps. Let's just see. So the backside, that should be ground. Yep, there's our ground. And what's there? Okay, 4.5 ohms. That's pretty good. That looks like CPU V-core. Tantalum capacitors, like these little square boys here, these are usually high capacity and low voltage. So it's got 330 written on it. So that's going to be 330 microfarads, and it's probably like 2.5 volts or something like that. So 2.5 volts, of course, that's perfectly fine for CPU V-core, which is going to be running at like a volt or something. However, that means there's no way that that is our main power rail, because the main power rail would need to be rated for, like, you know, somewhere between 12 and 20 volts. So for the main power rail, we want to look at these big electrolytic ones. So let's try poking those instead. So once again, if we go on the back side, we should get ground. Yep, and if we go on the positive side, there we go. So the positive side of this capacitor is 0.12 ohms, so that is also in a dead short. And this capacitor is more than likely on the main power rail because it's a big electrolytic capacitor. There's only one place you would use a capacitor like that, and that's the main power rail, where you want a lot of capacitance and you need high voltage as well. So there's some more of these over here as well, and if I check those, we're probably going to find those are also shorted. Positive side, which they are. Yeah. Okay. So the next thing I want to know is, so we've got a main rail short. It's not going into the CPU because we've already checked one of those CPU V-core caps, and like I'll check the others just for posterity, but I'd wager these are going to give us similar readings. 45 ohms. Check you down there. 4.5 ohms. 97 ohms. 97 ohms. So yeah, you get the idea. These guys are all CPU rails, and then the big boys are on the main power rail. And a main rail short is what we're expecting to see because the charger cuts out when we plug it in. So could it be the graphics card? Well, I've never done any diagnostics on a laptop that has a removable card. I can't remember what this slot is called. Someone in the comments will be able to tell me. However, I can see a bunch of bypass caps just behind the heatsink there. So I'm just going to thread the needle in and see if I can get a read on one of those. So that's going to be on GPU V-core. Oh, that's 100 ohms. That's not what I'm expecting to see. We've got, if we look at this section, there's two very big traces there. That's probably power going into the card. I'm going to stab those just out of curiosity. 16 kilo ohms, and 0. So we've got a ground and a power trace going in there, and those don't appear to be shorted. So I think it's reasonable to assume that that GPU is probably okay. I think it's also reasonable to assume that the CPU is okay because the capacitors around that seemed fine as well. So this is probably a simple case of just a busted capacitor somewhere on the motherboard. So I think to really know any more, we're going to have to take the motherboard out, and that means taking the cooler off, which means we can remove the graphics card and completely take that out of the equation as well anyway. So let's carry on disassembling in that case. I'm going to take the motherboard out of this. Something I'm going to quickly do now that I've taken those I/O boards out, I'm just going to measure again. If the short circuit has disappeared, it means that it's on one of those I/O boards. So let's just double check that we're still shorted. Which we are, yeah. Okay, keep going. If the short had disappeared, then I would immediately be suspecting one of these two I/O boards that I've just removed. If you remember the Dell Latitude that I looked at recently that had a couple of shorted capacitors on it, including one of them on the USB port, if you look at these I/O boards, you can see that we've got USB ports, and each one of the USB ports has a little IC on it, which is probably doing some power driving, and a big bypass capacitor next to it. So all of those would be suspicious. And we've got 3 there, and there's another USB port here, and also a Type-C port, and also just more power related stuff on this side. So if the short had disappeared, these two would be prime suspects, and we'd start putting these under the microscope. However, it's still there, so let's keep going. Some nice crusty thermal paste there. Are we going? I think we're going. Here we go! Oh, the laptop just became extremely unbalanced. Oh. Okay, so now we've got the motherboard out, I'm going to take this graphics card out and just double check that our fault doesn't disappear. Actually, I should probably just... Oh, no, let's put that back in a moment. Let's check it before we take the graphics card out in case it's already disappeared. So once again, checking one of those big caps. Yeah, we're still shorted. Okay, fine. It's a bummer that more laptops don't use this card format. It adds thickness to the laptop, that's the problem. But, man, how cool is that? These are really uncommon, these. That's a Quadro M5000M, apparently. So, that's got to be what, a GTX 240? Oh, I'm so witty. Okay, right. We'll put that to one side. And we'll check if we are still shorted. We are still shorted. Alright, so it wasn't the GPU. Okay, so we're in good shape at the moment because we've got a short on the main rail, and so far as we can tell, it's nothing important. Which means that there is probably a bad capacitor on here. So, what we need to do now is we need to just scan around the motherboard looking for possible suspects. So I'm going to just do a tour of the board, basically. I'm going to stare at it real close. That looks oh yeah, that looks mega jank. I think that's our guy. Yeah, that's it. Let's stop looking. Let's get the microscope out. Yeah, that's our man. That's definitely it. There we go, folks. That's a nice cracked capacitor there, so we don't even need to inject power to find this one. Of course, it might not be the only fault on the laptop, as we learned in the last one of these we did, but at any rate, that guy's coming off the board. So I'm going to get the soldering iron on, and I will just hit and run that. So I'm going to come in with some leaded solder on both sides of that and just get those joints moving. May as well take off both of those, because then I can measure the other one and find out what value it is. And actually, I think I'm going to hot air this just because of the position. Right, this guy's the cracked one. And it is shorted through. Get out of here. And this one, which was next to it, is high resistance and rising. Cool. All right, let's get a read on you. And our survey says 10 microfarads. Original and classic. All right, so that guy's going back on the board, and the other one goes into my naughty pile of dead capacitors. Right, in the last board repair video, when I was working on that latitude, we also had 10 microfarad capacitors to put on, and I extremely confidently said, 104, that's 10 microfarads. And I was actually 2 orders of magnitude out. I had just picked up the capacitors that were in front of me because I thought they were the 10 mic, because those are the ones that you always use. And just because I was on camera, I was just like, these are the 10 microfarad capacitors. It says 104. That means 104 is 10 mic. So 104 is actually 100 nanofarads. And what we needed is 106, which is 10 and 6 zeros, because we're measuring picofarads for these. So 10 million picofarads would be 10 microfarads. So 106 is what we need. I did fix that laptop again, by the way. But yes, I very confidently said it incorrectly in the last video, and people in the comments were like, that was a 100 nano. So yeah. Anyway, 106 is what we need. So let's get a couple of these out. And by a couple, I mean one. Let's take a quick time out to talk about what this capacitor is doing and why it needs to be replaced. Electronics are full of bypass caps that are very, very often critical failure points, and more often than not, it seems like you can just rip them off the board and the device keeps on working just fine. So why are they there in the first place? Well, when a chip in a circuit does something, it draws current from whatever power rail it's connected to. But electronics are really, really, really fast. So fast that it can take a moment for the power rail to respond to that current flow. Think of it like a queue of cars at a traffic light. When the light turns green, there's a delay as all the cars actually start moving forward, to the point where cars further back in the queue might not start moving for 10 or 30 seconds after the light turned green. This is inductance in the power rail, a resistance to the change of current flow. This creates a drop in voltage at the chip as it tries to draw power that isn't moving yet, and if the droop is large enough, the chip could stutter or lock up or generally fail to do the thing it's trying to do. So the solution is to place bypass capacitors right next to it. These capacitors store a charge, so there's a reservoir of power right next to the chip that it can draw from while the power rail catches up. Standard design practice is to go overkill on bypass caps. Basically any chip ever will recommend having a bypass cap on its VCC pin for stability. So an engineer will just season the whole motherboard with caps like a steak dinner.
Bypass caps are also there to deal with ground loops, which cause EMI from the board. As a repair tech, we don't really care about EMI, but as I'll get to in a moment, the solution to all of this is so simple that this is beside the point. You can probably rip half of all of these capacitors off of the board and not have any issues, which is why everyone seems to get away with it. I got away with it in my earlier videos, and even in my recent Latitude video, I replaced 3 10 microfarad caps with ones 100 times smaller, and it still worked. This is fine, until it isn't. Let's look at what this chip is doing. It's a DR-MOS power stage, which is 2 MOSFETs and the MOSFET driver built into a single chip. Modern fancy motherboards will use smart power stages, which go a step further and have temperature and current monitoring built in, which all provide more data being passed back to the VRM controller and the operating system. If we start a benchmark on the CPU, this row of power stages will all light up at the same time and try to draw a massive amount of current from the main power rail to deliver into the CPU. But if there isn't enough capacitance nearby, the power rail will droop while it catches up, and the CPU will at best stutter as it tries to ramp up its clock speed, or at worst, it just freezes on the spot, or even cuts power as the VRM chip suddenly reports that the CPU power is not good. This would be a nightmare to diagnose, as it might be intermittent or difficult to reproduce, or only happen under very specific conditions that the customer just happens to do regularly, but you, the technician, aren't able to replicate just by throwing Cinebench at it. Then after a lot of swearing, you open the laptop up to find that some idiot tore off a VRM bypass capacitor and didn't replace it, causing that single stage to stutter under very specific conditions. You might get lucky and that just never ever happens. Or you could spend a few dollars buying a 100 pack of 0603 10 microfarad capacitors and have the correct replacement part on hand 95% of the time. It's not difficult. Now let's get back to the repair.
One of those. And the other one that we took off, we can put that guy back on the board because he's fine. And I'm going to try and soldering iron hero this. So I will get the... Actually, no, I lie. I'm just going to hot air it. I don't know why, but I'm always tempted to just try and soldering iron when I can. Because it can be good practice to not use hot air if you don't have to, just because the iron can be more controlled. But also, for a job like this, I could struggle for 15 minutes with the iron, or I could just use hot air and be done in seconds. So let's just do that. Put some flux down. I'll get these roughly positioned. Squelch. And squelch. And we'll come in with the hot air. And I'm going to start at a distance with the hot air, just so I don't instantly blow everything away. And now they're sort of sitting in the flux. I'm going to start just bringing the air in closer. Oh no, I've just got way too much airflow here. Let's turn that down. There we go. I've just brought it down to, like, you know, 2/3 airflow. Half if you've got a big station. There we go. Perfect. Don't like what's going on here. Oh, it's just gunge. It's nothing. Yeah, it's fine. These little dots of gunge, that can just be some old glue, because when you do pick and place, when you're manufacturing a board like this, initially you have tiny little dots of glue that just hold the parts to the board until you actually do the solder reflow. Stops them floating away in the solder. So yeah, all these just little bits of gunge between them, that's just some old glue from manufacturing, basically. Now, are we still shorted? Black probe on a screw hole. Oh, that's voltage mode. That's not what I need. There we go. 14 kilo ohms. Brilliant. I should have checked that before I started replacing capacitors. I should have removed the capacitor and then checked again. It's good practice to check as you go so you don't get lost and forget what you're actually doing. We kind of got lost in the midst of, oh, that's a cracked capacitor, without actually checking if replacing that capacitor was going to solve our problem or not. However, in this case, it did solve our problem. So, we're all good. Let's put this back into the laptop. I'm just going to go ahead and just reassembly montage this, and I think we'll be done. Right, that's us reassembled. Let's plug in our charger and watch it explode. Alright, the charger light has stayed on. Do we have a charge light on this thing? Yeah, we've got a flashing battery LED at the front because I haven't put the battery back in. However, the laptop should start. Alright, I think the power LED is incredibly dim on this because the laptop had actually turned on. I'm just going to let it sit and think. Where's my chipmunk? Are you actually on? Right, you're not at the moment. Alright, there we go. Right, it power cycled and cut out again. Third time's the charm. I'm a bit worried about this. I don't like this behavior. I mean, it's powering on, which is more than what it was doing before, but if it were like RAM training or something like that, I would expect it to power cycle on its own and probably have come on by now. But yeah, it could be just RAM training and being upset and stuff like that. How's the BIOS battery doing? .3.0. It's not great. That should be enough for it to work though. I'll change that out anyway for preventative maintenance because I've got spares somewhere. We're not there yet, folks. Okay. One more try. If it's not going to go on the 5th attempt, then it's not going to go. Almost feels like it's... I'll take out the memory, which is a bit of a long shot. There's another 2 modules on the other side of the motherboard. So if we have to get those out, that's going to be a royal pain in the ass. But let's just try changing the configuration. Okay, it's actually power cycling now. That's actually RAM training. We might be getting somewhere. It is power cycling, but it's turning back on by itself. That's a good sign. Yes. Okay. Woo. Beautiful. All right. Cool. It's a RAM issue. Probably one of these modules isn't seated properly. I find it's really unlikely that one of them is dead, but you know, you never know. Might just be that one of them wasn't seated properly, because when I was working on the board, I was working on the back side of the board, which is what we're looking at, and I did peel the black plastic backing off, and I tucked it underneath one of the memory modules. So it's entirely possible that that just unsettled it. Yeah, there we go. Dell logo again. Amount of system memory has changed. F2 for setup utility. There we go. We're all sorted, folks. Oh, congratulatory stretch. Get the tension out. Right, that's us done. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Another easy one, but again, another good lesson in just how to approach these things. Take it apart, use your eyes, look around, take some measurements. You don't have to, lots of folks would have been saying, oh, why didn't you just inject power? Why didn't you get the thermal camera out? Because we didn't need to. We didn't need to do anything barbaric at all. All we had to do is take some measurements, use our eyes, and the problem was right in front of us. It's not always that easy. A lot of failed capacitors don't look like failed capacitors. The latitude we did last time, that had a failed capacitor on one of the USB ports, which looks completely fine under the microscope. And the only reason why we didn't get the thermal camera out for that video is just because I took a wild stab in the dark and got lucky. This time round it was very clearly visible, but again, if you don't look for the low-hanging fruit, then you will not find the low-hanging fruit. So, thank you very much for watching, everyone. Thank you, as usual, to all of my channel members and my patrons and my Twitch subscribers. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.